Sister Alvera had never imagined that her quiet life within the stone walls of St. Gabriel's Monastery would one day place her at the center of a mystery tied to an old, almost forgotten prophecy. She had entered the convent at the age of 19, running from the wounds of her past and seeking a place where she could finally breathe without fear. Over the years, she had become known for her calm spirit, her soft laughter, and the gentle way she guided troubled hearts who visited the monastery. Yet behind her peaceful smile lived a soul that felt a deep, persistent stirring, an unexplainable inner pull, as if heaven itself were urging her towards something not yet revealed. Everything began to change one winter morning when a visiting historian, an elderly man with trembling hands and bright, searching eyes, came to the monastery library carrying an ancient, dust-covered manuscript. He claimed it contained a forgotten message attributed to Dom Bosco, a message so controversial in its time that church leaders had chosen to store it away rather than risk confusion or fear among the people. The historian had spent decades searching for it, and when he found it in the ruins of an abandoned chapel, he believed God had guided him directly to it. Sister Alvera, who was assigned to assist him, listened quietly as he explained that the manuscript spoke of a generation torn between spiritual darkness and a desperate yearning for truth. A generation that would be tempted to lose hope, not by an enemy of flesh and blood, but by a growing emptiness of the soul. The prophecy, he said, warned that humanity's greatest danger would not be war, famine, or disaster, but the slow forgetting of its divine purpose. When he placed the manuscript into her hands for the first time, Alvera felt something stir deep within her chest, a trembling warmth she could not explain. It felt like recognition. She spent hours reading the fragile text. Its ink had faded, its letters warped, but its message remained strangely alive. It spoke of a time when countless people would wander through life feeling unseen and unheard, living behind masks of strength while carrying silent storms inside. It described a future where many would try to fill the emptiness in their hearts with noise, distraction, or temporary comforts, forgetting that the human soul was created for something higher, something eternal. Dom Bosco's forgotten message urged the world to remember that divine light does not fade simply because darkness grows louder. It proclaimed that in every age God would choose humble hearts, ordinary, unnoticed, imperfect hearts, to carry hope where hope seemed lost. As Alvera read these words, tears filled her eyes, because she recognized the faces of so many she had met. The grieving mother who lit candles every Sunday for her son. The young man who confessed he no longer knew what his life meant. The elderly woman who felt the world had moved on without her. The prophecy spoke directly to their silent battles. And then came the line that struck her most deeply. In that time, a voice will rise from the quiet places, not to condemn the world, but to remind it of its forgotten light. When she read that sentence, something shifted inside her spirit. But she quickly closed the manuscript, telling herself she was being emotional, not inspired. She had always considered herself too small, too ordinary, too unsure to carry any message. Yet what happened in the following days shook her sense of herself entirely. As she prayed in the dim chapel late one evening, she suddenly felt an overwhelming rush of warmth, a presence so gentle, yet so powerful, that it brought her to her knees. Her heart pounded, her breath trembled, and though she heard no audible voice, her soul felt spoken to. It was as if heaven whispered that the prophecy was not simply an old manuscript, but a call for the present moment, and somehow she was part of it. After that night, small changes began happening around her, changes she could not control or fully understand. People who rarely spoke began seeking her out, drawn not by her words, but by an unusual peace they felt simply being near her. A group of teenagers from the nearby town asked her to pray for them, saying they felt suffocated by the pressure to pretend they were fine. A middle-aged man confessed that he had given up on God, but somehow felt hope return after hearing her speak only a few simple sentences. Even the other sisters began noticing something different about her, although they could not quite name it. Alvera herself felt no greatness. Instead, she felt humbled, frightened, and unworthy. She spent nights awake, pleading with God, asking whether she was misunderstanding everything. But each time she prayed, she felt the same quiet assurance, the same inner flame that refused to die out. She realized the prophecy was not meant to create fear, but to awaken hearts. It was not about predicting doom, but about reminding the world that God still raised messengers, not from palaces or pulpits, but from hidden corners of life. And the most shocking realization came when she finally admitted to herself that perhaps she was one of the hearts, chosen to carry that forgotten message back into the world. Yet she feared stepping forward, not because she doubted God, but because she doubted herself. How could a simple nun, someone who had run from her past and carried her own wounds, be entrusted with something so vast? But that question became the very doorway to her courage, for she realized that God had always chosen imperfect vessels to carry perfect light. And this light, she felt, was no longer just for her. It needed to move, to breathe, to reach others whose spirits were silently collapsing under the weight of despair. And so, her journey began, not with certainty, but with trembling faith, in the quiet halls of the monastery where heaven's whisper had found her. Sister Alvera's path grew heavier and brighter at the same time. Word began to spread about the nun, whose presence brought an unusual sense of peace, though she never sought attention and often hid behind the pillars of the chapel whenever visitors arrived. The more she tried to stay hidden, the more people came. They arrived carrying burdens so heavy that Alvera sometimes felt her own heart ache from simply listening. A young woman came weeping, saying she felt swallowed by loneliness, even though she was surrounded by family. A soldier arrived one afternoon with trembling hands, saying he could no longer sleep because he felt trapped between duty and guilt. A boy of 12 asked why God allowed him to feel invisible when he prayed so hard to be noticed. Their stories were raw, painful, and deeply human. Alvera realized that the prophecy was unfolding right before her eyes. This was the generation Dom Bosco had spoken of, not defined by its mistakes, but wounded by its forgotten sense of purpose. As more souls sought her guidance, she found herself speaking with a clarity she did not understand. Her words were simple, gentle, and warm. Yet they pierced straight through the confusion people carried, as if heaven shaped her sentences before they left her lips. She reminded them that darkness does not win by overpowering light, but by convincing people to forget they carry light at all. She reread the manuscript countless times, asking God to help her understand every line, so she could share its wisdom without fear. And with each passing day, she discovered that the prophecy was not a frightening warning, but a deep invitation. An invitation for humanity to return to the truth that every soul is loved, chosen, and capable of radiating divine hope. Still, she struggled with the weight of this responsibility. Some criticized her quietly, saying she was reading too much into an old text. Others worried she was placing too much pressure on herself. Yet Alvera continued, not out of pride, but because she saw the transformation happening in the lives of those who came. It wasn't her doing. She felt like a small window through which light simply passed. One night, however, she reached her breaking point. After a long day of listening to the sorrow of others, she collapsed in the chapel, exhausted and overwhelmed. She whispered to the flickering candle, "Lord, I am not enough." Her voice trembled with the fear she had been hiding for weeks. She felt herself unraveling under the weight of being a beacon for others while fighting her own inner storms. The silence that followed felt deep, heavy, almost suffocating. But then, gently and unexpectedly, she felt that same overwhelming warmth she had experienced earlier, soft but unmistakable, filling the chapel like golden air. Her tears stopped, her breathing steadied, and within that quiet stillness came a truth she had never fully understood. She did not need to be enough. She was only asked to be willing. The rest belonged to God. From that night onwards, something within her shifted. She walked with more humility, more gratitude, and a deeper awareness that the message she carried did not come from her strength, but from her surrender. She no longer feared her imperfections. She embraced them, knowing God had chosen her, not despite them, but through them. Over time, the monastery transformed into a place where people rediscovered hope, where hearts once weighed down by confusion found direction again. Visitors didn't come for miracles or wonders. They came because they felt seen. They came because Sister Alvera's gentle faith reminded them of the light they had forgotten. She became living proof of Dom Bosco's message that in every age God raises ordinary souls who carry extraordinary hope into the world. And though she never sought recognition, her testimony traveled far beyond the monastery walls, stirring hearts in distant towns and cities. With each new person who walked through the monastery gate, she felt the prophecy breathing again, no longer forgotten, no longer buried in dust. It lived through every tear wiped away, every whispered prayer, every soul beginning to remember its worth. And as she continued her mission, she realized that the world had not rejected the prophecy. It had simply forgotten it. Until now, when the quiet courage of a single willing heart began to awaken it once more. As months passed, Sister Alvera found herself drawn even deeper into the quiet mission she never expected to carry. The manuscript of the forgotten prophecy remained safely locked in the monastery archive, yet its words echoed through every moment of her days. She no longer needed to read them to remember them. They had become part of her heartbeat, shaping her prayers and guiding her steps. More people arrived seeking not answers but relief from the heaviness inside them. Students anxious about the future, parents grieving the distance growing within their own homes, workers exhausted by a world that demanded strength but offered little compassion in return. She listened, she prayed, and she shared gentle truths that rose from a place beyond her understanding. She reminded them that fear loses its power when it is spoken honestly, that sorrow softens when it is carried together, and that hope is not a feeling but a flame that grows when shared. Despite her growing influence, Alvera lived simply, sweeping the chapel floors at dawn and tending the old garden behind the monastery in the evenings. The roses there had always been fragile, struggling to bloom in the harsh winds, but that season, for reasons no one could explain, they blossomed more beautifully than ever before. Visitors said the air around the garden felt different, lighter, warmer, as if grace rested there. Alvera wondered quietly if it was heaven's way of confirming that the prophecy's message was unfolding just as it was meant to. Yet she still carried her own quiet griefs, memories of a family she left behind, wounds from a childhood she rarely spoke of, and a lingering fear that she might one day fail the people who trusted her. But whenever such thoughts pressed against her spirit, she remembered the moment in the chapel when God had shown her she was not called to be strong, only faithful. And that truth steadied her in the silent hours before sunrise, when she walked through the monastery corridors with a candle in hand, praying for every soul who would step onto the sacred grounds. She prayed for those who felt unworthy of love, for those who believed they were beyond redemption, and for those who had forgotten that God still spoke in whispers to the quiet hearts of the world. And slowly, without seeking it, Sister Alvera became the living bridge between the forgotten prophecy and the weary generation it had been written for. She did not see herself as a leader or prophet. She simply believed that light was meant to be carried, not hidden. And in carrying it, she ignited sparks in others, sparks that traveled farther than she ever imagined, preparing the world for what heaven was slowly unfolding through her humble, unwavering yes. And so, as the days unfolded, Sister Alvera understood that the true miracle was not found in visions or extraordinary signs, but in the quiet transformation of wounded hearts. She realized that Dom Bosco's controversial prophecy had never been a message meant to stir fear. It was a reminder meant to awaken courage in a world that had grown tired, distracted, and spiritually thirsty. The forgotten manuscript did not demand knowledge. It invited people back to the simplicity of faith, to the warmth of compassion, to the truth that every soul carries a divine purpose that darkness cannot erase. As Sister Alvera continued guiding those who sought her, her life became a living testimony that God still speaks through the humble, the quiet, the unseen. Every smile she witnessed, every burden that lifted from someone's shoulders, every lost heart that found direction again, became proof that light never truly disappears. It only waits for a